Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A segment 132. Let's go.
Let's go. All right. We're going to keep it tight today because we have places to be.
And things to do.
And places to do.
Places to do things.
And be. And
we will be there inherently as we do things.
Yes. Okay. From the Discord this week, where every week they vote on some questions that have been posed, and the top vote getter gets asked of us, and we get answered of them.
Answered at them.
At them. This one is for you.
All right.
Carol Greider's, you may have to just give some background. I'm going to just read the question as written.
Yep.
Greider's paper didn't find a correlation between telomere length and lifespan. Telomeres do not seem to be a significant limiting factor in the lifespan of mice. And Jackson Labs claims we now know there isn't a big correlation between telomere length and lab versus wild. So, on what empirical basis do you claim that lab mice have a, quote, preternatural capacity to replace issues?
Tissues. It may say issues, but they mean tissues.
I said tissues.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misheard you.
I think I said tissues. It says tissues anyway.
All right. So here's the thing. You actually do not expect a longevity correlation with telomere length above a certain number. And the reason for that is because...
A certain number of, like, telomere length or
units.
age? Okay. The number being telomere. Yeah.
And in fact, Carol alluded to this in my first conversation with her. She said, effectively, all mice die of cancer, by which she meant all lab mice. And so the point is, once you have destabilized telomere length, what you get are animals that are all dying from the other failure mode, right? They have tumors from very early on. Those tumors grow, and eventually they kill the animal. So you don't expect a longevity correlation. In fact, you expect the inverse. What you get are animals that die early, right? If you fixed their telomeres, they'd live longer when they live to maximum age. They die early of cancers is what happens, and that's why you don't see that correlation. And this is perfectly consistent with a preternatural capacity to repair tissues, because effectively tumors are an over-enthusiastic repair mechanism. They're a repair mechanism that gets carried away with itself and runs away. And so these things all fit perfectly with the model, right? You get short-lived animals, all die of cancer, that have extraordinary capacity for repair, the extraordinary capacity for repair being the ugly downside of a infinite capacity to replace tissues damaged by toxic insult or other such things.
The third piece of evidence provided in this question is Jack's Labs claims we now know there isn't a big correlation between telomere length and lab versus wild. I guess it's all the same. It's all
one, and Jack's Lab apparently does not track telomere length. So Eric actually talked to them about the telomere length in their colonies, and they could not give him a history of how that length had changed over time, interestingly. So anyway, I'm not sure why anyone's listening to Jack's Lab on this point. They have an obvious conflict of interest and a studied disinterest in discovering the impact of their breeding methodology on their own mice.
Indeed they do. All right. First question from the DarkHorse Submissions site. We have one that was asked twice in slightly different forms. I'm going to read the one that was upvoted. Maybe I missed something as you were talking, but I didn't hear you talk about women who have had abortions and years later regret having one, or the truth that it stays with them all their life. I've met many women who've had abortions and are still haunted by their decision. I believe it's worth noting. And I guess in the other version she says, she adds, who go on to either regret or live with the scarring memory of going through with the decision. There's a lot that we didn't say on the topic, and a lot that we have said elsewhere, and even if you include all the places that we've talked about abortion, everywhere we've talked about it in writing and in speech, there's a lot more to say. It is certainly true that many women who have abortions think about it throughout life, and some of those women come to regret it, and regret will happen, unfortunately, from many of our decisions that we make. Pointing out that there is an option that some people can choose that some of those people who choose it, and maybe in some cases feel pressured into making the choice, will regret. I don't see that it necessarily belongs in every conversation about abortion. I do think that it's disingenuous and really mean-spirited, actually, for some on the left who are at the extreme end of the spectrum to talk about things like celebrating abortion. Any human being who has thought about what we are and what organisms are should prefer that this not be something that has to happen very often at all. The same, I would hope, would be true for litters of puppies, and for any of our other domesticated animals, and for wild animals as well. You can take that, everyone will draw a boundary in a different place with regard to which kinds of life they care about and which they don't, or in what order they put those kinds of care. But I have certainly met women who have lived with the choice that they felt that they had to make throughout their entire lives, did not regret it, understand their lives to have been much, much bigger, more rewarding. In at least one case, allowed them to then have a family that they could plan and could offer their children a life that they felt was worthy of their children, that they would not have been able to do had they not been able to choose early in their lives when they weren't in such a position. And I've also met women who did wonder with some frequency what their lives would have been had they made a different choice. Neither of those is necessarily exactly regret, but regret happens too. So, all of the diversity of human responses to such a situation, which is a dreadful one to find yourself in. That is, I am pregnant and this isn't right. This will be a problem either way. What do I do? It's a dreadful position. And none of the choice shouldn't be easy for the woman to grapple with, but it should be easily available once the decision has been made.
Yeah, I think this is exactly right. It's a significant decision, and maybe we should just leave it at that. I think the pretense that it is not an important decision, that it's just a choice like any other, is obviously wrong for most people, and maybe that even goes without saying, or it would if it hadn't been turned into a political article of faith.
Right. And I guess that's part of what, and that really is related to what you were raising and we were talking about in the main part of this live stream today, which is that so much of what should be a normal part of the conversation has been obliterated by the political landscape. And the political landscape has been created in large part and certainly maintained and massaged and enhanced by our two political parties. And for the most part, they don't care about these women or those babies or those fetuses or any of it. It's about political wins and maintaining a tribal duopoly in American political space, such that you can always get people to do what you want by putting this over their heads and saying, "What if? You got to vote with us because what if?" And as you said in the first hour, some of that has been destroyed with this. Some of their ability to bludgeon us with, you can't not vote blue or you can't not vote red because this thing might happen. Well, it just happened. Okay, now what do we do? Now what kind of bludgeon will they use? What will they discover next?
Yep. And, safe, legal, rare, and early.
Yeah.
Right? That's the world I want to see.
That's right.
And it's a world I'm seen as an opponent for advocating anything other than it's fine whenever.
Yeah. And I do not have the data at my fingertips here, but there are ample data that suggest that when it is available, that abortion rates go down. That you find, when society has facilitated helping people plan And plan will be read by some as a euphemism here, but helping people plan, including when they find themselves in the situations where birth control has failed and they cannot see their way to starting or expanding their family now, that in the broader societal context, abortion rates go down. And someone actually down here at the bottom here said, somewhere I thought, okay, this is a little bit related, but another question here. If you kill a helpless baby for convenience, what does that indicate regarding your attitude towards minorities? That sounds unrelated, and we'll get to that part of this question, especially given how ravenous the alt-left is for abortion. I, the question asker, writes, am pro-safe, legal, and rare. And you added early.
Yep.
And I think those are the 4 words we want, right? And if you accept the data, which show that when safe and legal, and when safe and legal, the rate of abortions go down, then you get towards more rare when you make safe and legal true. And the restrictions that will be in place in some cases, I hope that we don't get as restricted as some European countries. I think there are some European countries that are like at 6 or 8 weeks. And most women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, also I think the first trimester is too early, because the genetic testing that many women do, especially older women, as I was when both of our children were born, are at higher risk for genetic birth defects. And I'm not suggesting that anyone should be forced to get the genetic testing or make any particular decisions if they get a result that some people might make a different decision based on. But for many people, including us, we had that testing done, which is right around the halfway mark, and we're completely thrilled and would have been heartbroken had it come back abnormal and would have had some very difficult decisions to make.
Absolutely.
There's no guarantee as to what it is that you will do when you're faced with a situation that you've never been faced with before, no matter how certain you are in advance. And I'm not even saying we were certain, but limiting the ability for a woman to terminate to before she would have the testing that might change the decision that she would make feels like it is again disingenuous if you are pretending that this is for the good of the woman and her existing family, which many people are pretending. So with regard to the other part of that question, which I sort of went out of order here, but I think this question asker, who has a female name, but of course one never knows, says, I'm pro-safe, legal, and rare, says, if you kill a helpless baby for convenience, what does that indicate regarding your attitude towards minorities?
Well, I would rephrase it. Your attitude towards others. And I do think that there is...
All others. Everyone, not you.
Well,
Everyone
minorities, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I think the point is people are, it is much easier to be indifferent to people who are remote to you in, however many ways there are to be remote. People who are physically remote, people who are culturally remote, etc.
Right.
So I don't know that minorities is a good description of anything, but the point is we should be cultivating in people a sense of our shared humanity. And I do think that that is another hidden element of this discussion, which is if you pretend that this is an unimportant decision, right, that it's just another decision in life and who is anyone to tell anyone it's more than that, that it does result in a dehumanizing impulse. And I think that's the reason that early is such an important piece of this discussion, is that, those who say, well, it's a baby. Well, no, a zygote is not a baby, right? The zygote is a cell on the way to being a baby, right? And so there is some uncomfortable increase in the humanity of that process. And there comes a point at which there's so much humanity that none of us doubt it, right? And there's an intermediate point at which some do and some don't. And the basic point is it is always better to be biased towards the early end of that so that there is no or as little ambiguity as possible.
Yeah.
precisely because what we don't want to do is view other human beings with any kind of indifference. And there's also, there are questions about things that are similar to humans in some ways, the way we treat animals in laboratory testing, right? I don't think that's a zero issue either, right? And it's not that I think we are in a position to do away with animal testing. I think it's important because there's certain things you can't test any other way. But am I very uncomfortable with us rendering, the testing on primates as an unimportant issue, that, it's a matter of industry, it's not a matter of morality? No, I don't believe that at all. So, these things are complex, and frankly, I don't trust anybody who says, no, it's simple. Here's the answer. We've got it.
Yeah. Good. Sorry, my my screen is playing games with me again. Here we go. How much of history and prehistory is simply projection? We often cite ancient authors as factual observers, but they would have had their own biases and errors. Likewise, we tend to anthropomorphize critters' behavior and desires. I think those are two. I see that they're related, but I think there's really two different questions here.
There's three.
Okay, what are the three?
Well, the reason that we distinguish history from prehistory, and the distinction is prehistory is that which is before the invention of writing for the culture in question. So the idea is a first-person account of something is not objective because people are not objective. But a first-person account is different from something that we reconstruct in the aftermath. And then there's the question of the anthropomorphizing of creatures. And I would argue there's sort of a spectrum here, right? A person was there, they observed, but what we got was handed down through some non-written tradition. That involves a lot of transmutation of whatever actually happened to whatever we recovered.
But we are inferring through indirect means, like through potsherds or whatever. And we don't have to go through their understanding of what they were doing,
right? Which
is its own kind of bias that is introduced.
Well,
so the archaeological record, the prehistorical record, which is not a perfect overlap, but at least largely overlapping, does not have the problem of the people who you are trying to understand having had the capacity to lie to themselves or you in the interim between them communicating something and you receiving that communication.
Yeah, and in fact, at the risk of alienating a certain number of folks, the story of the virgin birth of Jesus shows us that even in a culture that had writing, it's not like you're getting an objective report, because what we now understand is that the word virgin is actually a mistranslation of the word young woman, and that the virgin birth is a mythologizing of an event that didn't happen that way. It can't biologically have happened that way, even if you think there's a tremendous amount of room inside of biology. We're talking about a male child of a female, so biologically,
even if the thing that has never been known to happen in humans, which is parthenogenetic birth, could not have a female producing a male.
Right, would not have had a female producing a male, and likewise, the rising from the dead. There's a whole lot in that story that does not describe a physical universe that we understand, and yes, you can impose a deity on it and all, but basically the point is, look, you had a culture that had writing. What we got is a fantastic story that does not match our understanding of the possible, okay? That certainly suggests that what happened wasn't literal, right? But it becomes, in many ways, even worse if you have a culture where you are inferring from potsherds rather than even words.
Well, no, but I think I had the opposite interpretation.
Right, it takes a subjectivity out of it.
It takes a subjectivity out of it, and I'm reminded of the joke that I used to give to my animal behavior students, because animal behavior was one of the things that I loved teaching the most, and taught and provided the students both the education and the space in the curriculum to do complete pieces of research, from the idea to the hypothesis to the everything all the way to the end, the communicating the results in both writing and in a talk. And as they, we also did a lot of reading on human evolution and society and behavior. And I would say to the students, well, unfortunately, with whatever animals you're going to be studying for your research projects, you can't just ask them. We can't just interview them like anthropologists can. And the flip side of that is, and therefore what you see them doing is what they're actually doing. Now, it is your job to interpret what it means. And one of the important and non-intuitive skills in animal behavior specifically is, as you are doing, for instance, a focal watch, where you are watching one particular individual at a time, for an individual organism at a time, you write down, depending on your particular recording method, you write down exactly what you see them doing, not what you think it means. So, you write down the actual interactions between two, say, male mantella frogs. You don't just write down fight. Now, you might start encoding it after you've seen it a number of times, like this is a fight, but here's what I've actually written down. Because if you just write down what you think it is, then you go back later and you say, oh, I got 8 of these things. Really? How do you know? Well, because I said it was a thing and I've got 8 of them. Like, on what basis did you make that claim? I didn't record that. I just wrote down what I thought at the time, which was that it was a fight. And then you have no data and you have no basis on which to make any claim at all that what you were actually seeing was a fight or territorial or anything. This is made both easier and harder by talking to humans about what it is that they think they're doing, because they will not only deceive themselves, they will also deceive others. They may deceive you, the ethnographer, as the informant from a population that is being investigated by what might appear to be like random white people who've shown up and want to know things about them. So that there's pros and cons in each of these situations. And yes, there's going to be bias, but I think it's actually going to be it's one reason that seeking data from, when you're talking about humans, seeking both direct and indirect evidence will help you map the things onto one another and see if they actually match up.
Yeah. I must say, there is a kind of care that has to be taken when understanding animals, but I often see people draw the line someplace that I believe makes no sense, right?
Yes.
In other words, to the extent that you are looking at a mammal, you are looking at a creature where there is a justification for a certain amount of extrapolation. And if you're looking at a primate, it is even more the case. And this is proven by Jane Goodall, who cracked the case with respect to chimpanzees by virtue of the fact that she did anthropomorphize them, and that basically you couldn't make progress if you treated them as objects. And that and that frankly, it's not subtle. When a chimpanzee is angry at another chimpanzee, it's obvious. And you are, there is a limit to what you can understand about why it's angry, but deciding that you don't even know that it's angry is obviously absurd, right? Likewise, I think I was describing on a recent podcast that a cat may actually like to have its tail pulled. If you lift up a cat by its tail, not a cat that's overweight, if you take a cat and you gently lift up its hindquarters by its tail, you can tell that it actually likes it. I'm not saying every cat does, but many cats do, and you can tell because when you put them back down, they circle back to have you do it again. And the point is, there aren't a lot of interpretations there. The animal has returned to the place that something happened, right? Not because it doesn't want that thing to happen. So anyway, there's a lot that one can infer.
Yeah, and it should be a cat who knows you and who likes you and knows that you know and like them as well. I totally agree with you about anthropomorphism, and that was what I saw as the second part of this question originally. And I think it's Frans de Waal who has said in several of his books, basically, what the hell is wrong with people who claim that you can't anthropomorphize animals? You have to if what you're trying to do is understand their behavior and their social systems. Because pretending that we aren't humans doing the interpretation, and pretending that we don't share much of what they are with them, is the kind of, it's frankly a religious style mistake. Imagine that there's this discrete boundary between what humans do and what everyone else does, is to forget that what you're looking at is an evolutionary process.
Yep. In fact, I'll just add one more thing, which is that there is a very famous philosophical piece I can't believe I'm not remembering the exact title, something like What It's Like to Be a Bat by Nagel.
Yeah.
And a teaching partner actually inflicted this, what I believe is a terrible, What It's Like to Be a Bat.
What is it like to be a bat? Yep. From 1974.
Inflicted this on a class that we were co-teaching. And, there is an element of warranted caution in here. But basically, Nagel's point is, you'll never know. And having studied bats, I can tell you it's not that dire. There's lots you will never know about being a bat. But there's also lots of stuff that you can infer rather easily. And, I'm not arguing it's not an art figuring out where to draw that line so that you don't over-extrapolate. But hobbling yourself by saying, a bat is a very different creature, and therefore you couldn't possibly know anything is absurd. And the fact is, at least in the realm of animal behavior, we learn from those who do the job well, not those who champion the fact that no one can do the job well.
That's absolutely right. And we acknowledge that it will be more difficult to do the inference that we are trying to do with regard to animal behavior, the more distantly related the organism is.
Yep.
So it's harder. It's harder to know the mind of a frog than the mind of a bat. Harder yet to know the mind of a shark. A coral's really going to be tough, in part because they don't have a mind. But
right.
What is it like to be a morel? What is it like to be?
Well, what is it like to be a morel? Probably nothing.
So I mean, then the question presumes you are suggesting that there's a self-reflection, that there's a consciousness possible, in which case for some of these organisms the question doesn't make sense even before you get to morel.
Right.
That probably doesn't, it doesn't make sense for a coral either.
Right. Well, here's the tough one, is something like a spider or an insect. If you see an insect behaving, if an insect is trapped in a jar and it behaves in the way an animal in the zoo does, and it runs some circuit and it apparently has lost its mind, it isn't clear that the animal has a subjective experience. You can't rule it out, but it's really hard to understand what would be enhanced about the functioning of the creature if it did have a subjective experience. So it's quite possible.
Even under purely normal functional circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
So the problem is that if a mongoose in a cage and an insect in a similar environment behave in the same panicked or stereotypical way, you can be pretty darn sure that the mongoose has a subjective experience not terribly different from yours. It is very hard to make a powerful argument that the insect has one. You can't rule it out, but the point is there's a reason that an animal that didn't have a subjective experience would behave just like one that did, and that's because the subjective experience is trying to solve the same unsolvable puzzle as the automatic experience. And so what I would argue is, you have a subjective experience. You're on pretty solid ground to infer that the mongoose does, and when you get to the insect, if you don't recognize that you've got a difficult puzzle that at least leaves open the possibility that the animal has no subjective experience, but it is of course possible that it does for reasons you haven't figured out yet, that's kind of where the gray area is. And I really do look at insects this way, and spiders. I look at them and I think, I can't rule it out, but I can't understand why it would be there. And so I have to be agnostic, really, right? I have to say, I personally doubt it, but if you came up with evidence that said, it does have a subjective experience, I'd say, that's fascinating.
Yeah. No, and there's, it's interesting that part of what we have done sort of professionally is try to understand why the subjective experience in the terminology you're using now, some with great overlap with theory of mind, right? Great overlap with consciousness, why it shows up where it does. So when you say insects and spiders, at first I think, okay, it's going to be all invertebrates, except for cephalopods.
Right. What do you do?
Right.
With,
So
what are you
going to do with cephalopods? What are you going to do with octopus and some squid, at least, maybe? And then, is it all vertebrates? No, it's not all vertebrates. It's not going to be, I don't know, sardines.
Right. Well, could be.
Schooling.
You're in sort of a similar position as insects. It's hard to see where a sardine gets a value from a subjective experience, and if it doesn't get a value, then there won't be one. But what do you do with a Sicilian, right?
I didn't know you were anti-Italian.
No, different spelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Very,
okay.
so different. So different.
I'm proud to know just that it is spelled differently, having no real idea how to spell either one of them.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna blow people's minds who give any kind of a crap at all about spelling. The Sicilian to which you were referring is Caecilian, and it's one of the 3 clades of amphibians that no one's ever heard of. So you got frogs, which includes toads, you got salamanders, which includes newts, and then you got Sicilians, which are entirely pantropical except for Madagascar, burrowing, legless amphibians. So what are you going to do with Sicilians?
Yeah, it's hard to see where a subjective...
And pretty solitary. I think they have
Yes.
they have maternal care. They have good maternal care, but then they go do their Sicilian thing, burrowing and spending all their life underground.
They do. The Godfather theme is now playing in my mind as a result of your terrible accusation of me. But anyway, so this is the real question: is you won't see subjective experience is expensive to produce, so you won't see it where at least the ancestor of the creature hasn't gotten a benefit for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the only way to get to rational puzzle solving.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. Next question. I showed your gender is software arguments to a friend, tracing the etymology back to 12th century AD. But the friend insists that there is only sex, and all talk of gender was invented by sexologist John Money. Can you elaborate more on this?
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
There has to be a software component, whether we define it as subordinate to sex or not, because the variability between the two sexes in the different behavior is so great, right? That is to say, within a sex, the behavioral variation within humans is so large that we know it's transmitted at the software level. And so even if it didn't have a separate term, it's about damn time that it did, and it seems to overlap what people mean when they say gender. So the question is the fact of the abuse of the term gender substantial enough that we need to invent a new term for the software of sex, or should we be doing what you and I have been doing, which is trying to retain the meaning in the term that we have rather than surrender it to people who wish to abuse it?
Yeah, I guess I would add to that I actually have not gone back and looked at the etymology, but I've heard versions of this, and it's not always even the same one. But, no, the term gender was invented by such and such, and that's really recent, and therefore gender isn't real. That argument falls into the same trap. It's effectively a postmodern argument. Until we had language for the thing, there wasn't a thing. That's not right, right? Like, if we have language for a thing, there's a good chance that there's a thing that predates the language for it, one. And we know for sure that there are behavioral ramifications of sex, more broadly, sensu lato, the software of sex, but that there are behavioral ramifications of sex that are much more sort of much more fixed action pattern type stuff, to use an old psychological term, in other animals, such as in sex-switching reef fish, where when the sex changes, so too does, and we just call it, in non-human animals, not gender, but sex role. It's the same thing. So, is it possible that gender was invented as something that isn't real, and recognizing what it should be, a bunch of people over in reality space went, oh, I know what that is, and so we're going to use that word, and now there's confusion, in part because the original meaning of the particular word that we're using was invented for something not quite right? It's possible, but it doesn't change the fact that sex and gender, use whatever words you like, but let's be clear about it, that sex is hardware, gender is software, and almost all organisms that have a sex also have some aspect of a sex role or a gender.
All right.
Roe distorted politics for 50 years by placing a moral issue out of reach of voters. A return to federalism is the only way to keep the country together. If you don't like your state, you can vote with your feet.
I hate this vote with your feet argument. There's obviously an element of truth to it, but it obviously also has there's a tone deafness to it, because A, there's a class issue. not everybody can up and move, right? That's a matter of your privileged position, the fact that your job allows you to move.
Right.
It's also not true that us simply moving to some place where the legislature is more in line with how we see the world is a good way of going about things. In fact, there's a strong argument to be made that the fact of people moving to the place that their job took them was very distorting of the things that united us and made us more functional. And that said, there is a value to states having leeway under the federal rubric.
Mm-hmm.
So I think both things are true, but I hate the idea that, it's like when we were kids, if you made an argument that something that the country was doing was wrong, then the point was, well, why don't you move to Russia? And it's like, well, don't do that. Sorry, no. So anyway, yeah, it's good to be able to vote with your feet if you have to, but it's hardly a good remedy.
Yeah, indeed. So Zach, I know you're working on the video component that's gone kind of wonky, but it's just a little, the one that we're left with is a little bit wonky here. It's a little bit tilted.
Yeah, I'm making sure we'll still have audio.
All right. And we have audio now?
Yeah, but it's echoey for some reason.
Wait,
That takes out the audio.
why is it dead?
It's overheating.
It's overheating.
It's not meant for this.
But
You're good.
we're gonna go make it even briefer than we thought. I'm just gonna pull a few more questions then, okay? Just in case we're about to lose this.
Hold on, I need to talk to Zach. Hey, Zach,
Okay.
switch to this.
I'm doing that, but it's... Don't worry, I'm doing it.
Okay. Do we?
Should be good.
All right. We could do a pantomime.
I think they can hear you now.
Thumbs up if you can hear us.
No, they can hear you, but this isn't working.
Okay.
Just talk.
I'm going to just keep going. I stand with Dr. Relegator and would like to see a duel between Peterson and Trudeau. Pistols, is it pronounced rapiers?
Yes.
Or banjos. It matters not to me. Now, I don't know if Jordan Peterson or Justin Trudeau are musicians, but I hope they both are, and I'd love to see.
I'm pretty sure Jordan is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Are we on this audio now? Okay. Yeah, that wasn't really a question, just an observation. I'd like to see a duel between Peterson and Trudeau.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, you don't have anything to add? You want to go on to the next one?
No, I think it's a cool idea. I just, I got nothing more.
My insurance just hit me with a huge bill because apparently preventative vitamin D tests are no longer covered. I wonder why. Keep up the good work, you two. That's terrible. Sorry. It's ridiculous.
Preventative vitamin D tests are no longer covered?
Yeah. No.
Wow.
I'd like to hear, 2 more anecdotes like that before I know it's not some glitch in the system, but...
Right. That seems absurd for any organization that benefits from making you healthier so you use less insurance.
Yeah. Ancestrally, if the youngest kid stays longest in the mother's bed instead of sleeping together with older brothers and sisters as soon as mom gets a newborn, does that create the condition for a different perception of kinship?
Yeah, I would say this is one among many issues of birth order where the way to think of it, either birth order has to be one of two things. It's either a maladaptation where there's either some best way to be, and being born at a different place in the birth order distorts you away from it. That makes little sense, but it's possible. And the other thing is that it's an adaptation where being born at a different place in the birth order changes what is best for you to be, and so you end up different.
Right.
And the fact is,
one size is not likely to fit all.
For one thing, if you're born later in the birth order, you're born into a world that has your older siblings in it, and therefore the niches that you might inhabit are different.
Right.
You also know some of, what jobs are taken care of and which ones are open. Maybe that's the same idea. But in any case, the last born not being evicted from the bed because no new one has arrived, that won't always be the way it is, but to the extent that it is, it may actually speak to a different relationship between the parent and the offspring and their role in the family.
Yeah. No, and you would predict that to happen, for instance, in cultures where it is expected that the last born, at least if of a particular sex, will be the one to stay and take care of the parents and their dotage.
Yep, absolutely.
Do we still have real uses for non-STEM paraphyletic groups in classification, or are they just a relic at this point?
Wait. Try that again.
Do we still have real uses for non-STEM paraphyletic groups in classification, or are they just a relic at this point? So I'm thinking, birds that doesn't include dinosaurs is... So
STEM does not mean... It's not the acronym
It's
STEM.
not the acronym STEM.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then I would say...
We don't, but some of them are so, like, birds... What is STEM and what is not STEM in phylogenetic systematics depends on your vantage point, right? It's a question of where you're standing. And so, are birds STEM? Depends. But, so in common parlance, we're going to continue to talk about birds and... Or I said that backwards. I didn't,
right.
Yeah,
birds are monophyletic.
Yeah, I said it backwards. I meant dinosaurs, not including birds.
Yeah.
So dinosaurs, as usually understood by people, is paraphyletic. And usually you would say non-avian dinosaurs if you're talking to systematists or you're obnoxious like us and you're just talking to the world. But dinosaur is understood enough by most people that, at a conference on dinosaurs, you're not going to have people continuing to talk about non-avian dinosaurs usually when they are meaning to exclude birds. So,
well, I have made the argument, and I still believe, although I got strong pushback on it, there is zero defense for paraphyletic groups. There's no problem saying non-avian dinosaurs. That says what creatures you're talking about without making a phylogenetic error. And the reason that it is so important that we speak in a rigorously phylogenetic way is that it does all of the heavy lifting, or most of the heavy lifting, in terms of teaching people what kind of a process adaptive evolution is. In other words, to know that cetaceans are artiodactyls tells you what kind of a process selection is, because it's the kind of thing that can take a terrestrial artiodactyl and turn it into a whale, right? So it is difficult to come up with a taxonomy that is perfectly rigorous in cladistic terms, and the reason is because at the very fine grain, we're still learning who's related to whom.
Well, and even, there's some big ones, right? Like testodines, which is the group of turtles and tortoises. There are still real arguments about exactly where it goes. And there was a moment 20 years ago or so where we pretty much thought we knew where it went within the vertebrate tree. Like, they're reptiles. We got that. They're reptiles. But exactly where, like which other reptiles they are most closely related to is still in question. And so their placement will change what thing is paraphyletic relative to them, or whether or not they are paraphyletic relative to something else. And since we don't know yet, we will continue to use the language that we have, with the understanding that if we're trying to have a systematic conversation, it will be accompanied by a tree or several trees, which are hypotheses of relationship between the organisms that we're speaking about.
Yep. So I guess the point would be, pending complete information, we have to be somewhat tolerant of slight imprecision or unavoidable imprecision. But to the extent that we know who is related to whom, we should absolutely endeavor to be perfectly rigorous in our taxonomy so that it matches our cladistic understanding, because everyone, I mean, do you really want to deny children the understanding that they are in the park looking at dinosaurs? I don't. I think it's marvelous, and I think they're entitled to it. And pretending that those aren't real dinosaurs because they're birds is absurd. I mean, a hummingbird is a dinosaur. How cool is that?
Yeah, indeed. We've got a few here that are not exactly questions, so I don't know if I'll just read them.
All right.
Well, this one is a question, but the answer, at least from my perspective, is no. So, are you familiar with Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance? It hard-codes the idea of rules for thee but not for me as an overt and just tactic in leftist ideology.
Of course it does.
Yeah, of course Marcuse did that. And so the question asker provides a YouTube link, which we are going to go to now. Have you been following James Topp? CanadaMarches.ca. No?
I don't think so.
And Vax versus Unvax transmission, susceptibility, benefits, risks. Love you guys. I think maybe this person just wants us to
riff
on risks, benefits, susceptibility, and
yeah.
Vax versus Unvaxxed transmission.
Well, I can give you an educated guess, which is absent the vaccines, even this unusual virus would have calmed down and become less of an issue, and that we are pushing it around at a collective level in a way that is causing us never to address the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And at whatever point we stop doing that, we will be better off. We need to unleash the drugs we have that work so that we have another tool. It's not like, vaccine or fend for yourself. It's these remarkable vaccines with all of their downsides, or a bunch of drugs we know really well that are also effective. That's a much better world, but it's a world we don't get to see.
Yep.
So yes, in light of antibody-dependent enhancement, original antigenic sin, and a number of other processes, it does not make sense to keep playing this game. This is now a self-inflicted wound several times over, even after we get past the lab leak.
Indeed. Okay, couple more comments, couple more questions, and then we're done for today.
All right.
Some societies, writes Sam, have social pressures against extramarital sex. Yes, they do, as I think we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S., second comment, U.S. needs to resolve abortion with state referendums, removed from the political. It's not clear to me that state referendums are removed from the political. I think I understand the point just being made, but...
yes, having grown up in California, I will say they are hyper-political.
Yeah, and in some ways they're dirtier. I mean, California is such a giant economy. It's not tiny, but they're nasty and deeply political. And of course, in California, it also has cascading effects on the rest of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, there's also this other issue, though, that I believe it's referenda, that referenda are liable to be inappropriate because they are so easily politicized, and that in essence, a representative democracy is one in which people who are well positioned to know what these issues are about rule on our behalf, which isn't the same thing exactly as us ruling on our own behalf, but it is designed to do that same job.
Yep.
And, I think one of the arguments that was strongest against Roe was that it was effectively the job of the legislature to figure out what we collectively need done on this issue, and that it was done through the courts on, a bad premise. And so good law that actually did navigate what we collectively believe and, as much as possible, protect all viewpoints that can be reconciled would be a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think we've been jerked around by political parties that are way too interested in making us ununderstandable to each other, and they've done a good job.
Yep. Penultimate question. Why is abortion such a big deal, but killing animals for meat is not?
Well, it has a lot to do with the fact that human fetuses become people.
Yeah.
And so it is, in essence, it goes back to the issue that we were talking about, what I was calling sleight of hand, where we take people who have resulted from, pregnancies that have gone to term and try to infer back.
There is a valuing of human life over other life that is both intuitive to most humans and also repugnant to many humans if they think carefully about the basis on which they're doing it. And the exception in that former group will be that many religious people will say it ought to be that way because human life is sacred in a way that other life isn't. For the majority of us who don't believe that, and who don't believe in a special class for human life above and apart from all of the other life, then there's the additional question of sort of helplessness. But of course, we domesticate animals and for meat and turn them helpless. So I really do think it is about the special category of humanness.
Yeah, I think it is. I also think that is appropriate. I don't think it's absolute, right? At the point that we treat elephants or chimpanzees or gorillas with indifference, I think we make a dire error. Mm-hmm. But there is something very special about humans. It is also, if we want to sort of push the concept around to see how robust it is, why are we indifferent to the killing of plants, right? Is the killing of a plant really a non-issue just because it doesn't experience something? I think it is a non-issue, but the point is, if that's the deciding factor, domesticated animals have a great evolutionary deal, right? They've come to outnumber their wild counterparts by many, many orders of magnitude. And if you raise them, I think, raising them inhumanely is a serious moral question. But raising them humanely and killing them humanely for food is not, right? So anyway, there's a lot of richness to this question. But I also think there's an intuitive, most of us know that raising an animal in a cage where it never sees the light of day, there's something wrong with that, even if we can't explain exactly what it is.
That's right.
And I think we also, most of us understand that raising an animal outdoors in a pleasant setting and then it ceasing to be at some moment isn't a terrible fate. We all live and then cease to be at some moment.
Yep.
Right? So anyway, there are difficult questions here, but we shouldn't make them more difficult than they are.
That's right. Final question. What type of prophylaxing or precautions do you both take prior to traveling? This has been changing, right?
Are they talking about COVID?
I think I read the question as it exists, and I can't see more into it than the words I read, but I take it to be that, and I don't think, neither of us prophylaxed with anything in particular before COVID, unless we were going into malaria territory. And I've talked before about some parts of it are supposedly malaria territory not actually being malaria territory, and therefore you're not necessarily needing the malaria prophylaxis that you do if you're going into, that you are very much better protected by, even as toxic as most malaria prophylaxis is, by taking well enough in advance before entering the territory so that you're protected from malaria. Except for that, we never prophylaxed with anything in advance. And, I think we've both been on 3, 4, maybe even 5 different types of malaria prophylaxis as our collective understanding and our individual understanding of how they work and on what species of malaria and all of this have evolved. But for COVID, well, there wasn't much traveling there for a while at all, and it's still pretty slow. It's still pretty spotty. But through, I don't even know if either of us went anywhere in 2020. I can't remember after COVID hit. But in 2021, you in particular were going some places, and you were prophylaxing with IVM.
Yep.
And being very careful to keep your contacts before going limited.
Yep. Vitamin D, better if you can get it from the sun. avoiding indoor spaces if you have to go into indoor
Talking about
spaces
while traveling or before?
while traveling.
Yeah.
The higher the volume, the greater the circulation.
Actually traveling, but in terms of the preparations, which is what the question was about, avoiding those spaces in advance so that you're less likely to carry something to a new location. Because it's not, if you're traveling, you are now taking on a burden that at one level is not, you're taking on a responsibility that you need to take seriously, that you are now at risk of exposing people who had no choice in the matter. And so you need to be as unlikely to be infected with a pathogen as possible when you travel, and that's true under all circumstances. But just as the world probably now understands that going into work when you're actively sneezing and coughing from a pathogen is not a good idea for your coworkers, and probably not for you either, so too does being knowingly exposed, say, to COVID and then getting on a plane the next day. That's really not okay. That's not okay, whether or not you feel fine. But it's not yours to take, to expose other people without their having a say in it.
Yeah, I wish we had this conversation more explicitly with respect to all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
We basically need to have a general policy that causes people not to interact with each other when they have an illness beyond a certain level, right? Do we want that to be a cold? Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe we all agree that we're going to get colds, but
what is the beyond a certain level? You're not going to get on a plane with typhoid, right? You're not going to get on a plane with yellow fever and a swarm of Anopheles mosquitoes around you, because if it's just yellow fever, there's no mosquitoes. You're actually not a risk to other people, I think.
True.
Flu, probably not cool.
Not cool.
Cold, okay. And so now, what is COVID becoming? COVID is actually ridiculously, stupidly dangerous because it's a Frankenvirus. So it's not just like, it's another coronavirus. On the other hand, it's becoming so ubiquitous, it's evolving so quickly that people are getting, both exhausted of and sloppy about being careful.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's stupidly dangerous. People are going to flag us for that. I would say it is more dangerous than the case fatality rate.
It's stupidly dangerous for a coronavirus.
Let's put it this way. There's an awful lot of unknown about how dangerous it is by virtue of the fact that it does not appear to be a natural virus.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think at this point, carry with us the two early treatments that are available over the counter, IBM and HCQ, just in case. And when traveling, maybe go back on that dose of supplements that at this point seem pretty smart to take if you live in a temperate zone where it gets dark and cold in the winter, such that you're unlikely to be generating that much D yourself and are likely to be in enclosed spaces with other people who might also be bearing viruses. So that's like D and C and zinc and magnesium and quercetin if you get the kind that's actually bioavailable. Yeah. All right. I think we're there. We are not going to be here next Saturday, but we will be here the Wednesday after that, which will be on July. Going to keep on delaying until I can see that it is going to be July 6th.
July 6th.
July 6th, yes. We're not sure exactly when yet, but on July 6th, we will be back here with you in our usual location, I believe. And until we see you then, please do subscribe, like, share, talk about, discuss, dispute, disagree with, agree with, and be good to the ones you love. Eat good food and get outside.
And have a great 4th of July if you're an American, and if you're not, also have a great 4th of July.